Hi, and welcome to Real Talk Leadership Lessons from the Field. I'm Audrey George with Audrey George Consulting, and I'm excited to introduce you to the guest and co host for today's session. First of all, our guest is Aimee Daniels. Aimee is a chair with Vistage Worldwide, which means she leads multiple cohorts of CEO peer groups across the Chicago area. And our co-host today is Destiny Lara, also here in Chicago. Destiny is a civil engineer who graduated from Northwestern University last year.
Aimee, Destiny, thanks to you both so much for being here today. I'm very excited about this conversation and looking forward to hearing both of your perspectives on leadership. And so I'd like to start, Aimee, by just asking you first off, what made you decide to pursue a leadership role as part of your career trajectory?
I think as a young person, I was pretty ambitious and I had the opportunity in the bank that I work for to become the head of marketing research. And so I was like, why wouldn't I do this?
That makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah.
an opportunity presented itself to you. And then what about kind of as your career continued? You kind of made a pretty big jump. Can you talk about that change and what led you to that?
Yeah. So I worked in banking for a long time and until about 13 years ago. And, in banks, the progression is pretty, well defined. It's different than what many people face in flatter organizations today. But I kind of knew what I was working towards. And Um, I think there were some foundational things. I think in my 30s, I started to realize that I needed to really be focused on my team and not just myself. And had a chance to go and get some development at an organization called Center for Creative Leadership, which made me realize like where my strengths actually lied. And I was told I was a natural leader. And all of that led up to me changing companies that I work for. And that's when I really got probably, the highest level job that I had. And, but I think I had to go through an inner process first. I realized I was working for an organization that didn't value developing people. And I needed to make a change in order to be aligned and be in a place where I was able, to not only have the bigger role that I wanted to have, but to have an impact on other people through being able to empower them and to, create a culture where people had the opportunity to express.
So it sounds like kind of your own journey led you to want to help others develop their path. Am I here?
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I think about my life, like I've always been about like how do I help empower other people? Like at the core, like I never wanted even going back to high school and I was the captain of the pom pom squad. That's a little embarrassing now, but I wasn't worried about competing for myself. I wanted the team to do well. And I think going through this process and realizing like okay, that's actually a strength that I have is how to help the team do well. And one of my employees actually is the one who pointed that out to me. It was not obvious to me, but when she said that to me, it made me realize, like, yeah, I really kind of am in every part of my life someone who wants to build the community. And that was really a fundamental shift for me to realize that.
Yeah, interesting. So I could say from my experience of you, I would completely agree with that sentiment. Absolutely. And so
But I didn't know myself.
that makes sense, right? Often we're the last ones to know something about ourselves, right? That's not the first time I've heard that. So, any like, how does this affect your kind of the way you would define leadership? How would you define leadership today?
Well, I think it's really setting up the team and the organization to win. So it's both empowering the people, but it's also, making sure that they have what they need to succeed, which that might look like processes and strategies and like understanding, kind of where are we all going together? What's our why as a group? But I think the two together.
Makes a lot of sense. Destiny, how does that resonate with you? Kind of, how do you think about leadership? How would you define it?
I would define leadership as the ability to keep your teammates accountable and on track to meet the common shared goal of the team. A leader is not necessarily someone who has the most knowledge in the room, but someone who knows how to utilize everyone's skill set and just keep the energy and passion alive in the group.
Kind of similar, right? It sounds like both of you are thinking about developing teams, elevating teams, including voices, right? Including ideas. Interesting. Interesting. And this question goes to either of you. I guess, Destiny, let's start with you. Is there a leader that you worked with yet? I know you're young in your career that's kind of from any aspect, doesn't even have to be from a job, that's been inspiring to you? And if so, kind of how did they inspire you?
Well, in my job, my manager, we have weekly check-ins, and it's just not checking up on my workload. It's more checking up on, are you meeting your common goals? Is there something that you're not being exposed to at work that you would like to be exposed to? So kind of listening to what I want to get out from this experience and like grow my career path. I think what makes a leader a great leader and kind of resonates with me.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Aimee, how about you? Has there been a leader that you worked with that inspired you along the way that especially stands out?
Well, the one that a couple people pop into mind, but like one I want to share because it was when I was about, in the beginning of my career, like Destiny is, I was in a job, my first job was in IT, which it's like, that's so like not really me, but it was a great experience because it wasn't all didn't come naturally to me. And there was a guy who was the most senior person in our group, and he just believed in me.
Oh,
And that had such an incredible impact on me. And there were a whole group of people kind of at his level in different departments. They would ride the train with me, they would talk to me. And I think just the fact that they were very human, and they cared. And then they would also tell me, like, you got to be patient, or, here's a different perspective on this from someone who worked longer. So, like, those are the people who inspired me. And I think it's because they cared.
which really echoes what Destiny just said. Yeah. It's working for her too. Like both of you and one showed up for you in what sounds like kind of a basic way. How are you? What can I answer for you? Are you getting what you need? Which seems like a pretty basic check-in, but very interesting that that's kind of what resonates for both of you.
Yeah, I like Amy's point about like seeing someone as a person rather than just like a coworker or a teammate.
Uh-huh.
Kind of like just get to know your teammate. I think it's important to know who you're leading and the people you're working with. It creates like a better environment, um, especially at work. And
Excellent. Great insight. And let's talk about team building, right? Kind of you both had mentioned the importance of team. Aimee, how do you approach that? How do you approach building trust, building kind of camaraderie in groups?
Well, to Destiny's point, like, you need to know who you're working with, right? So, it's a lot different if you can build your own team or if you're inheriting a team.
Cool.
One of my roles, I walked into an established team that had some challenges. Um, and I won't get into what those were, but what I did then, I brought someone in to help me. And she interviewed everyone, and then we went and did an offsite. And I don't think we used any kind of, disc or anything like that that I might use today to help me figure out how our people's personality is different. But I think that that's the starting point, is to like to help the team understand how are their perspectives different, and to let everyone's voice come into the room. And then you, as a leader, you have to discern, right? You have to discern what's happening.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. And Destiny, what are your thoughts kind of on that response on what you've seen that works for team building, and if you've run across anything that actually hindered team building?
yeah, I agree with Amy said about just building that psychological safety among the group and like understanding everyone's work habit and work environment. Because as a leader, you could use that skill to optimize the individual and team performances. I guess. Sorry, can you repeat the second question you had asked?
No, I was just asking kind of anything that you've experienced that you thought worked well for team building, or something that you experienced that was the opposite, right? Have you run into anything that you didn't think was
Yeah. So actually in school last year when I was in capstone, we were divided into different teams. And I think the first like half of the class or the first half of the quarter, our team was just doing really poorly because we were just not connecting. We didn't understand what we each wanted from each other. We didn't have a common vision. So I think once we sat down, realized what our final project, what we envision our final project to look like and what we each brought to the table, different skill sets, what we know from our past classes that we taken. We were able to build that relationship and then successfully uh, produce a capstone project at the end.
What you're really talking about is a word that you hear thrown a lot around a lot in business called alignment, right? Like, are we all on the same page? Do we know where we're going? And, to kind of build on Audrey's previous question, sometimes teams are not aligned, right? And sometimes it's because people have personal agendas. And I think one of the pre-questions you gave us was like about a leadership challenge, right? And I will say one of the things that I've learned is, I always want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Like, I'm someone who has to go out and think about what I want to do. I'm not going to be like on the spot, like, this is what I should do. I want to think about it. I might want to talk to someone about it. But like, I would say one of the mistakes that I made, I had someone who was behaving poorly on my team, and they were undermining me, and a couple people came and told me. And so, because they thought they should have gotten my job. And a couple people came and told me, and I took a really light hand at first and said, like, is there a problem in our relationship? And he's like, no, no. And then he kept doing it. And so then the same people came back to me again and said, he's still doing it. And so he had a nickname for me. I'm not making this up. I'm not going to say what it is on a podcast. He had a nickname for me. And so I had to say to him, like, the nickname has to stop. And he said, it's a term of endearment. And I said, if it is, then why don't I know about it?
Mhm. Wow. You're not calling me that's my face, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty brazen. That's pretty brazen. And so kind of failure, right? The idea of failure, the concept of failure, like in today's kind of business mentality, like fail fast, right? Is like move fast, break things, move on. Uh, is kind of I think how a lot of folks view failure. I'm interested, Aimee, and then Destiny, I'm going to ask the same question to you. Kind of how do you view failure, kind of in your role as a leader?
Well, I think, first of all, we all make mistakes, right? Like, anyone who's led people, you're going to, you can look at some things and say, well, that was not my best moment, or that was not my best decision, or whatever. And I think the important thing is to be humble. And if you've made a mistake, to own it and say, I'm sorry, that was not a good decision. Um, and to, clean it up or apologize. Um, and, maybe even to explain why. Like, what came to mind for me, I had someone on a team at my not-for-profit who was saying that someone else was bullying her. And um, I'm like, we got to have an investigation, right? And so it just took too long. This was my mistake. It took too long to do that. And we ended up, asking the other person, this is a volunteer thing, we asked the other person to leave. But like, in hindsight, I really felt like I harmed the person who had the complaint because we did not move fast enough. Because I couldn't conduct the investigation, right? Someone else needed to do it. And I felt like I harmed the person by not being fast enough. So, I mean, that's a real life example. You might want to edit that out. But I mean, I just think these are the things leaders face, right?
I have to say, kind of not moving fast enough on personnel issues is a common theme that I've heard in my work with leaders, right? Like, I've never heard somebody
Time.
right? I've never heard somebody say, I needed to make a change. I wish I would have taken longer, right? It's always the opposite, right? We knew what we had to do, but we were trying to be nice or like make sure or
Right. You don't want you don't want everyone to be treated fairly.
right, kind of suss out to make sure we have all the facts correct, right? You want to act rashly, but sometimes in the kind of goal of not acting rashly, like the flip side happens, like you just explained. And how about you, Destiny, kind of on the idea of failure? Like, how do you think about failure as an opportunity, as a responsibility?
Hmm. Well, like Amy had said, no one's perfect. Everyone fails. And so I would be lying if I said failing has never discouraged me. But I think I've come to really appreciate failing. I've learned to take the time to see what went wrong in my failure and make the right approach or adjustment to set myself up for success in the future. I guess a quick example I could think of is like when I was in school and would fail an exam. I wouldn't let that discourage me. I wouldn't let that reflect my ability as a student, but kind of just take the time, reflect on what I did wrong. Maybe it was my studying method or like note taking skills, and make the adjustment to succeed in my next exam. So I've kind of learned to appreciate failure and just make sure to reflect on it, take the time to examine what went wrong.
Really a little mindset. Do you know what the growth mindset is, Destiny? It's really about having a growth mindset. Like everything is for us to learn from. Right?
Yeah, I've never heard of that. Can you like
Yeah, it's based on the work of a woman from Stanford named Carol Dweck. And it's all about the idea that we can have a growth mindset, which like if we fail, there's a lesson and we're going to learn the lesson and get better. Whereas if we have a fixed mindset, we believe we have to be perfect or we're not good enough, but then we may not be open to learn. Right. So we always want to have a growth mindset. And like one of the examples, Michael Jordan, great basketball player, if you're from Chicago, right? And, he got cut from his high school basketball team, but he had a growth mindset. He's like, I am going to do this. I'm going to go practice every day until I make the team again. And that kind of grit or commitment, he had that through his whole career. And, the results show that, he continued to thrive.
Yeah, I think the idea of failure, at least for me, I've just kind of raised, I suppose, then more of the fixed mindset, but just the expectations of perfection, not just of doing well, but like literally not making mistakes was somehow something I got into my head as like that was what it was expected of me, right? I'm not supposed to make mistakes. And so looking back on my career, had I had kind of that mindset sooner, right? It's just really recently that I'm good with trying something that I'm not 100% sure I'll succeed at, right? That's a new development for me. This at this middle age, let's call it. So I have to say, like I feel like Destiny, kind of your attitude about it being more like an opportunity, right? Like what can I learn from this? And what Aimee just shared about the growth mindset, I think that's a much healthier way, right? Because I can tell you, like I was paralyzed at times, right? Because just like, what do you mean I made a mistake? And it could have been like a really small one, right? But it would keep me from taking the lesson, right, and growing from it. Even though I think I did learn, it was still somewhat paralyzing. It's really the best word I can think of. And so I was talking about someone with this with somebody this morning, and she said, "Isn't it? It's freeing though, right? Now that we've gotten there, like it's can kind of."
We all have that negative self-talk, whether it's perfectionism or I think I'm not good enough, or I think one of your questions about having imposter syndrome, we all have that voice in the back of our head and we just have to talk to that voice and say, like, that voice is not me, right? Like that voice that thinks I'm not good enough, that's not me, right? Like it's just my voice and just like give it a name. Like my imposter thinks I shouldn't try this, right? Because then you start to neutralize the voice, right? So it doesn't stop you. Because I think a lot of people struggle with perfectionism and imposter syndrome and just like self doubt or comparison. It's really easy to compare yourself today with social media. Um, I think you got to manage that inner voice. What do you think about that, Destiny?
Yeah. Um, I don't want to say I suppress it. I acknowledge that like there's a voice in my head saying I can't do it or something is off. Like, why am I failing? I think I recognize I like talk to myself I'm like Destiny, like this is just a hiccup. Everyone goes through this. Like you mentioned, no one is perfect. Just take this as a life lesson or a lesson in general and just fix it. I realize I think understanding that no one is perfect, understanding that everyone makes mistake kind of helps me see and like your point on social media and like LinkedIn especially, like you're always seeing people thrive and like succeed. You're like, oh, like why am I not as successful as them yet? Like I'm only 23. Why don't I have like a whole business and stuff like that? Um, so just kind of bringing myself back to earth, back to my mind, like, Destiny, you're only 23. You still have your whole life ahead of you. Everyone has their own career progressions. Don't rush it. Appreciate the small moments, because when you are up there in the future, you're going to be looking back and reflecting on, like, wow, like, you needed that moment in order to become the person you are today. And this kind of brings me to a question I wanted to ask you. When you are going through failure, or like even dealing with difficult person, what are some, I guess, strategies or relaxation skills that you use to just relax, let the stress out, just rethink everything?
Mm. Well, I'll take it and then Audrey can pipe in here. But I would say, I might talk to someone that I really value their opinion, or I have a coach, I might talk to her about it just to help me think about how am I processing what's happening. But certainly good friends can do that for you, or, if you find someone who's willing to be your mentor at work, they can do that for you. But for me, making sure I'm balanced, I try to meditate every day. I walk my dog a lot, so being outside and not being on my phone or listening to a podcast or anything, really being present in the moment, that really helps me a lot. And honestly, making sure I'm getting enough sleep and taking care of myself. I think, if you're tired, or what is that thing they call hangry or whatever, you're not going to roll with the punches as well. And sometimes just stepping away is the best thing you can do. Just give yourself a little space. I think once our brain frees up from its, being triggered, often the right answer comes. And all those things do that, right? Go have some fun too is another good one.
Mine is exercise. I'm a different person if I work out in the morning, and it has to be the morning. Because what I learned about myself over time is if I let it go till later in the day, I'm just going to keep doing. Once I start working, I'm just like, I get in the zone, I stay in the zone. And I'm going to say I'll knock off at this time and go do a thing. I won't. I have to do it in the morning to get it in my day. And if I do it versus if I don't do it, I'm literally a different person. And I can that's my release, right? Like, hopefully before things are happening, right? And kind of sets me up for the day. And the other thing I've learned over time is when I am kind of stuck or upset or something's throwing me, I kind of write down some thoughts, or I write down the thing that I think might be true or I'm afraid might be true, and kind of examine, is that real? Right?
That's a great idea.
Right? Like, if I can see it on paper, sometimes you guys have both talked about self-talk, right? And actually, I remember during the Summer Olympics, there were so many interviews with athletes, and so many of them talked about positive self-talk as one of their kind of key pieces of their training, right? I really kind of thought about that a lot during those Olympic weeks when we were kind of all trekking that in Paris last year. And for me, kind of sometimes I have to like actually stop myself. And so to do that, writing it down and looking at it on paper, right? And then because something's different about thinking it and reading it in my processing. And so if I like, I literally kind of that thing I said about not being supposed to, like, not being that I'm not supposed to make mistakes. That's the first time I learned that. Like, someone suggested, like, I want you to take the things that you tell yourself and write them down and then look at them. Right. And that was the first thing I wrote down. I'm not supposed to make mistakes. I'm not supposed to need help was the next one.
Right. And then you got to create the new affirmation, like, it's okay for me to make mistakes. It's okay for me to ask for help. Right. Because we want to flip it to the positive always.
Right. And then just the third part for me, Destiny, and the other part of this was, what would I tell my best friend, or what would I tell my coworker if this were reversed? If my coworker came to me, if my best friend came to me and said, I'm worried about X, what would I tell them? Right? Because then you can see a lot more clearly, I think, and when it's yourself. So
And that's actually one of the biggest mistakes I think people make at work, and especially as people get more senior, is sometimes people just really don't take care of themselves. Like, there's a belief that it's selfish for me to do this or whatever. But if you don't take care of yourself first, you really are not available, for anything in your life. And so it's counterintuitive, but like really making that time a priority, for yourself and putting it on your calendar, like Audrey said.
Something I learned that, like, from just working, that has helped me a lot is just eating breakfast. By just like waking up an extra 30 minutes and making myself breakfast and eating it, I feel more motivated, have more energy to continue through the day. So I think as I continue on my career, I'm just learning more about myself and what I need to feed myself mentally and like physically in order to be that person I want to be.
I love that. Being myself mentally and physically. I like that. A great way to look at that. I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna use that somewhere. Huh. What's the other questions that you have for Aimee?
Well, a lot of them you kind of just answered in your responses. I guess I do have a question. What obstacles prevented you or discouraged you from pivoting away from your old career to your new career, and how'd you overcome it?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I think having a plan was an obstacle because before I left my banking role, I would say it was, well, I'll tell you exactly what happened. I had a health scare and my assistant, who's still my assistant now, Diane said to me, she's like, the way you're living your life, it's not working for you. You like are not taking care of yourself and you really have to take a look at this. Right. And so, I mean, it was a potential cancer scare. I'll just tell you what it was. And it turned out to be nothing. Um, but I really started to do a lot of introspection. And one of the things that I realized was that I was in an environment where I was expected to lead in a way that's just not who I am. Right. Like I actually had two bosses, but one of them was an extremely ruthless person. And he thought I wasn't tough enough. So I was trying to be like this tough person, which is like not me, right? Like I can give, direct feedback, but I'm not going to be like, a hammer ever in my life. And I don't want to be. And I started to realize like my values weren't aligned. But then I kept trying that. Like I interviewed for a job within the same company just to move because I knew I was going to have to move and I didn't want to leave America because my mom was still alive and I wanted to, be able to be close to be able to hop a plane home. And so I interviewed for the job. Same tough boss says, you were the most qualified person. I didn't give you the job because you were not excited. And when he said that to me, I thought, damn, like that's true. That was like 100% true. And so I was like, I can't be mad at him because it's true. I was trying to just solve a problem, right? I knew I needed to make a change and I was just trying to solve a problem. So, um, what ultimately happened, how I got over it is I figured out a plan where I would have enough money if I was just careful. And that I knew I would need, let's say I would need a year to pivot, right? And during that time, actually, we went through an reorg at work. I announced I was going to leave and not move. And it gave me time to look at some other roles, but ultimately I knew I wanted to be back in Chicago. So I defined what I wanted. I knew I wanted to be back in Chicago. I knew I was willing to live on less money than what I made if it would allow me to be living in my values. And I really wanted to live by my family because I had been living away from them and it like made me super sad. And so I was going to live near my niece because her son was 5 then. Now he's 19. It's been a while. But but I don't know. And then it was a leap of faith after that, right? Like I just set up, I set it up so that I could take my time and I tried different things like the fact that I ended up with Vistage, totally kind of an accident, right? I just started getting asked to help people with their companies. I did interview for some jobs, but either they were someplace I didn't want to be, or I just was like, I don't want to do that. And then all of a sudden the path appeared. And we were talking a few minutes ago about like unplugging from things. So I was away on vacation with one of my friends and I woke up one morning and we're in this really cool place called Carcassonne, France. And I wake up, I'm in the shower, and like I just had this like drop in, like, you're just done with banking. Like, you are not meant to do that anymore. And it was about probably 3 or 4 weeks later that someone suggested I consider Vistage, and then it happened fast, right? Once I started talking to him, happened the first part happened fast. Audrey can appreciate this. Then, I was asked to go to training and whatever, but then it was hard getting started. So and I had days where like we were talking about our inner self-talk was not good, right? Just not good. I'm like, I'm not doing well. I'm not succeeding. Who would want to, work with me, all this stuff that our brain makes up. But I just kept staying with it. I stayed with it and it worked out. And then it got easier over time. So I think, that was a big, long answer, Destiny, probably more than what you wanted. But I think underneath the answer is just like have a plan. Doesn't have to be fully thought out, but have a plan. And then, you know, just be open, right? Just be open and define your values and really what you want. What is it that you're desiring?
No, thank you for sharing your story.
Mm.
I asked last thought I had. Do you think you mentioned that you took a training? Do you think like it was necessary to go back to school or do other certificates or to make that pivot?
I guess the way I would answer that is like, for me, I needed help thinking about it. And um, so all the things that I've done over time have helped me think about it. But I also like being part of organizations, like you're an engineer, finding organizations for engineers where you have the opportunity to meet people who are kind of on the same path you are. That's a great way to make friends. I used to have a group of ladies. Unfortunately, we're not together anymore, but we would meet every month or two. We would go to dinner and someone would be in the chair. We used to call it being in the chair, and you had to talk about your personal and your work life. And so, thinking about making a change, like people would say what what they thought, and um, I think the reason the Center for Creative Leadership was so powerful for me is that they have peers review you, and then they also have a therapist, and like they watch you all week and they give you feedback and whatever. And the therapist said to me, like, you stay too long in things that don't work for you. And I'm like, huh, guilty, guilty. And then the peer feedback was exactly like the same. It was like, you're settling for less than you should settle for in your life. And I was like, huh. And it was like so humbling, Destiny, like to have two people tell me that like in the same day. I think I might have been crying the whole day. I don't really know. But like that was what I needed to get my attention. So I think there's two kinds of skills. I think this was in Audrey's questions too. There's like technical skills, which like we should always be investing in our technical skills and our craft, right? Like what's the next thing I need to learn to stay fresh? And that's important to being a leader because you still need to, even if you're leading, you need to be able to talk to your clients and your people on your team. You need to know what they know, right? To be able to have a good conversation. But the other part is like your own self-awareness, like who am I as a person? Who am I as a leader? And to know like what works for you. Um, Not so much my last jump, but when I was at one bank for quite a long time, and actually I decided to leave there after the Center for Creative Leadership. And what I realized was the things that I valued they didn't value. Like, I really valued developing people. They didn't value that. They valued, like, people bringing in new business, which I did that too, but I wasn't the top person at that. But I cared about the people. So, like, I had to figure that out myself to say, like, here's what I really value. And the Strength Finders test is a great test to do for that also. Like, what are your natural strengths? And then just having the courage to act on it.
I've actually taken the string.
Have you? What are your strengths? What are your top strengths? Do you know?
I just remember my top one being learner.
Oh,
Kind of different. Yeah. What about yours?
I don't remember the order of mine anymore, but I know I have like relator, connector, I think I have achiever, They've changed a little bit though over time. I guess they can change, like the order of them can change.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember mine. My achievers one, learners one, and something mission focused. What's the one that's something about like something related to like based on doing things based on mission. I can't remember what that's called. Yeah. All right, Aimee, what advice would you give to aspiring leaders? Kind of what are the couple of things you would suggest that folks think about or focus on?
Well, if you think about, so there are 3 things. That was one of the questions, top 3 skills. I think the first thing is self-awareness, to really work on your self-awareness. Like, how do you impact other people? And just to recognize like your tendencies as a leader, because the first person we have to manage is ourselves. Even if you're not you're leading yourself all the time, right? So I think self-awareness is really crucial. And I think if you think about where you see people derail in their career, it's often because they don't realize how they're impacting others, right? And they can't take input. So I would say self-awareness is first, like emotional intelligence, all that kind of stuff. I think working with peers is really crucial. That can be sort of the great derailer of people in their careers, is if they can't work well with others. So I think always having an eye to like, how do I make sure I have good relationships with my peers? How can I be collaborative? Um, we used to call it we versus me, right? Like we're a team. Let's be a we. And then the third one is really being able to critically think about the whole organization. We don't necessarily get taught critical thinking in school. I guess it probably depends where you went to school. I'll just say I did not get taught that in school. And really being able to look at things from the big picture. And I think that's when having good relationships with your peers sort of plays to that, right? Like you might know your own area, but until you understand what everybody else is doing and kind of how it fits together, it makes it hard. I think it makes it harder to be a good team player. So, and I guess I would add to that part of it is, you know, it's not a competition. Like within a company, it shouldn't be a competition. Sometimes you see cultures, I know Audrey has for sure, where people are competing with each other in the key roles. But it's like, your job at that level is to really, be a keeper of the culture, a holder of the culture. So really, thinking about the people first.
What
Would you
yeah,
change
I'm sorry. You start over. Go ahead.
would you change any of your response if you were talking to a younger version of yourself?
Well, I love the question about the younger version. What I would tell my younger self is be patient and really focus on your values and making sure that you're working in situations where you're aligned with your values. And I think the other thing, just reflecting back, it's like there were my very first job, I would get great feedback on, that was good. Don't do that again, whatever. But for a long time in my career, people wouldn't tell it to me straight, right? Like it was just cultures where it was like, oh, you're doing great. Just keep doing what you're doing. And I would rather have someone tell me. I think that when I was younger, I was very sensitive to criticism. Now I'm like, thank you. Thank you for telling me because I didn't know. And even if it hurts my feelings a little bit, I'd rather know. So I guess I would say, take what's there for you when someone criticizes you. There's always something to learn, but it doesn't make you good or bad. It's just like, okay, we're all learning.
There's so much value in real talk, quote unquote, right? Like that's something that like people, if you ask people to describe me, right, they're like she's gonna tell it to you like it is, right? Yeah, it's something that like I've had to actually learn to tone down a little bit, but I do that. Kind of my approach to that is like I just want to kind of share with folks what I wish folks would share with me. Is kind of the whole idea, right? Like if somebody's got an idea or a way I can do something better, like that's all. Like let's talk about it. Like yes, let's do that, right? So I think it's such a gift, right? To be able to receive feedback as a gift, though, I think is a skill that you develop. I don't think that's something that folks naturally come to work with, right? We want to do a good job. We want to be seen for doing a good job. and to be told good over here, but maybe not so much over here, we can get lost in for me, that was true. I got lost in like, I made a mistake. I didn't do it right. And I could get stuck in that.
That's our growth mindset. Turn on the growth mindset.
Right. That's exactly right. That's exactly where I was going to go, kind of back to what you said earlier. So to kind of be able to take that as an opportunity, right? And kind of to take that failure, right, that we talked about and to push it forward. I think that's great.
I think the other thing, going back to one of Destiny's earlier questions, you were asking about like, what should you do to continue learning, whatever. If I would say the one thing I see that doesn't happen much in organizations is people are not trained to lead or to coach or to supervise people. And hopefully your company does that. But if they don't, that would be a great investment for you to make, just to say, okay, I'm gonna learn how to do this. I'm gonna find an affordable class, or I'm gonna learn how to coach people. There's so many things, even just on LinkedIn now, I understand that you could take to learn things. I think, if you see that there's a skill that you think you benefit from, go find a place to get that if the workplace isn't providing it.
Yeah, it was great to hear because I know there's like a common misconception that like leaders are born, like you can't develop the skills or like.
Not true. But the other misconceptions is that leaders look a certain way. I actually just got off the Zoom with somebody that's on in the same group Audrey's in, and he's a very warm, loving, caring human being. And he's got a bunch of people working for him who are pretty tough, and they think he's not tough enough, but like he kind of holds the culture through that care, for lack of a better word. And so, like in their mind, if you're not that dominant personality, you can't be a great leader. But that's actually not true. People can have all different kinds of personalities and be great leaders. It's just about, learning what it takes.
Yeah. And I would kind of echoing part of or building off of what Amy said a minute ago, as far as kind of finding kind of learning opportunities for yourself, I would also be looking for like real life ones, right? Like, is there someone that can mentor you, or can you even just ask to sit in on extra meetings, right? Things that you wouldn't normally get exposed to, and kind of watch the people that are leading and see what you can take away from them, right? Like, for me, kind of, you know, classroom learning was helpful in one way, but kind of the real life pieces, the watching other leaders navigate tough situations or tough decision making, or just even how they approach their day, right? Kind of, I've had the opportunity to kind of shadow some folks or to be in collaboration with some folks, and just kind of what you soak in from walking through kind of a typical kind of day to day experience. I think there can be really important learnings there as well. All right, Destiny, we get to all your questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Aimee, anything you wanted to ask Destiny before we hit the final round questions here?
I guess my one question I would have for you, Destiny, is, if someone was leading you or managing you, what would you most want from them?
If someone was leading me, I would want them, as I mentioned before, to check up on me, to like see me more as a person instead of a commodity, or like helping them, in a work environment, meet the client's goal, but more of, okay, Destiny, is this what you want? Is this what you want to be exposed to? But then also, I would want to learn from a leader, like ways they handle problems, way they communicate to clients or tackle situations that, I might not be exposed to starting off my career. So I think just, a leader recognizing what position I am in and where they want me to be, and then also taking where I want to be into account, and like finding that common ground.
Yeah, it's like there's been like a kind of a humanness thread throughout our entire conversation, right? Like what worked for you, Aimee, when you were trying to figure out what you do next, was to find a place where you could be yourself, right? Kind of, and that's where you found a way to thrive. You were not thriving in your current environment because you were not living your values, right? And so kind of aligning yourself with those has created this whole other opportunity and really this whole other career. And I don't know what better word to use than thrive, because that's clearly what you've done. And I think kind of what Destiny has shared, where she has found success herself and what she's looking for and growing. I think those are really good lessons for leaders, right? Whether folks are in kind of the corner office right now or aspiring towards the corner office, kind of living our values and kind of treating each other as humans, right? And even kind of in the teamwork discussion that we have, right? Like kind of connecting with people first and understanding what we each bring to the table and how we can benefit the group. You tried to, Destiny gave that example earlier where your group tried to just kind of come together and start working, right? And it didn't work, right? It kind of, you all weren't collaborating well until you backed up and kind of brought the human nature to it. So, interesting thread.
Destiny used the word belonging,
Mm,
Sharon. That really struck me.
yeah, for sure. Okay, let's wrap up with some lightning round answers. Aimee, for you, what's the best leadership advice you've ever received?
You can't manage everyone the same way.
Ooh, say more about that.
Well, it was when I worked at American National Bank, and I was talking to the head of the banking department, and he explained to me that, you need to take the person into account. And he said, if I yelled at your boss, he'd hide under his desk for the next 3 weeks. But if I don't yell at that other guy down the hall, he doesn't hear me. And I'm, huh. And so that would really help me when I stepped into a role where I had two people. They were exactly the same age, literally born on the same day. And one of them, if I got into his business, it was completely unproductive for him. And the other one, if I did not, you know, stay in constant dialogue with him, he did not get things done. So it proved to be great advice for me. It's just kind of like know who the person is and know what they need.
Right? Is there a quote or a mantra or anything like that that you live by?
You're going to laugh. This is from Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, I'm gonna laugh.
Spock said it. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one.
Go what? Yeah.
I can't do the hand thing,
I
though.
was gonna say, and he's in the tank, right? That's
He's in the tank with his hand on the wall. Destiny might not know what we're talking about.
he doesn't know we're dating ourselves. Yeah, ain't yet though, because I was talking over you.
Okay. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one.
Old Star Trek. Yeah, pretty sure that.
Star Trek.
Yeah, and so this last question is for both of you. Aimee, I'll start with you, and Destiny will give you the final word. If you could sum up your leadership philosophy in a word, how would you describe it?
For me, encouragement.
Encouragement. Love that. Destiny, how about you?
I think I would say versatility.
Versatility. Say one word. Get that word. Great choice.
Well, how Aimee mentioned, like, firstly, you can't approach everyone the same way. But then also, like, when you do hit a bump in the road, are you able to take that step back and navigate in a different direction? Are you flexible, adaptable to different circumstances? So I think that kind of describes what versatility is.
Great answers. Great answers.
What's your word, Audrey?
You know me, I would say inclusion,
Mm.
right? Kind of inviting everyone in, hearing voices. I was talking to somebody today that said kind of, are you open to good ideas can come from anywhere? Then you should work for our company. This is that kind of a place, is how they put it. And that's exactly how I approach leadership. I want to hear from everybody, right? I want to consider all the perspectives because learn more from, we will learn more from each other when I'm combining diverse experiences and taking them to kind of collaboratively forward. We can elevate ourselves, we can elevate organizations that way. So that's what drives me every day, always. Well, thanks to you both so much for doing this. We're a really great experience, really great to hear both your perspectives, and I appreciate your time and your insights.
Great. Well, thanks for inviting me. Nice to meet you, Destiny. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.